Hello everyone. In this video we are going to explore the anatomy of the eye. We're going to begin with the layers of the eye, which are referred to as the tunics. The tunics make up the wall of the eye, and they extend to some of the inner eye structures. And if you're going to be following along, the structures I'll be discussing are found on page 117 of your lab manual. We won't cover everything on page 117 in this video, but we will cover most of it, and this is where we're going to get the ball rolling. So, when we look at the anatomy of the eye is made up of 3 layers, referred to as tunics. You can think of a tunic as simply a coat, so it's got 3 coatings to it. We're going to discuss those from the externalmost to the internalmost. The externalmost of the tunics or layers is called the fibrous tunic. And the fibrous tunic is made of 2 structures, the sclera and the cornea. These are 2 very different structures, but they are continuous with one another. In other words, there's no physical separation between them. The sclera makes up about 4/5 of the surface of the eyeball, but most of it is hidden within the orbit of the eye. Only a small fraction of it is visible anteriorly, where it shows up as the white of the eye. This is a thick, dense connective tissue layer that basically creates the physical support that holds the outside of the eye together. At its anterior end, the sclera kind of transitions into another structure known as the cornea, and the cornea is right here. Right? The cornea is an anterior bulge. It is made of a transparent layer of tissue, and it's transparent and clear because light needs to pass through this. This is part of one of the structures that light passes through as it enters the eye in order for you to see. The cornea also interacts with the sclera, which we discussed in the earlier video. Or I'm sorry, the cornea also interacts with the conjunctiva, which we discussed in an earlier video, but the conjunctiva does not cover the cornea. If we move interiorly, the next layer or coat is known as the vascular tunic. It's called the vascular tunic because it is rich with blood vessels. Right? And the first structure of the vascular tunic that we're going to be discussing is called the choroid. The choroid can be found in this kind of right here in this peel-away view. Right? It's kind of that pinkish layer, and it's very small on the diagram. We can see a little bit of it here with that same color, and it makes up this thin layer here between the white and the yellow. And it extends anteriorly where it kind of bulges, it kind of forms this extension here. This is where it's thickest. And this anterior extension of the vascular tunic creates what's called the ciliary body. So the ciliary body is shaped like a ring, but because this is a sagittal section of the eye, we only see where it's cut on the upper, or I should say the superior and inferior portions of the eye's wall. Right? So that's the ciliary body. Right? The ciliary body shown in red. Right? The ciliary body, right, is composed of muscles, right? The ciliary muscles, right? And the ciliary muscles connect to the suspensory ligaments. Right? When the ciliary muscle contracts and relaxes, it either alleviates the tension on the suspensory ligaments, or it pulls on the suspensory ligaments. And the suspensory ligaments, if you can see here, right, these little strands, they connect to this structure right here, which is the lens. The lens is what focuses or accommodates light as it enters the eye and focuses it on the retina, as we'll discuss in just a little bit. Right? The ciliary body also has a structure known as the ciliary, let me write that better, known as the ciliary process. And the ciliary process produces a fluid known as aqueous humor. Right? And we'll discuss the aqueous humor and its role in the next video. Right? The last portion, or the last structure that is part of the vascular tunic, is the iris. The iris, you might remember from the previous video, is the colored part of the eye. Right? And we can see it's shaped like a donut or a ring, but in sagittal section, we just see the upper and lower portions of it, and that is the iris. The iris is made of smooth muscle, and at the center of the iris is an opening called the pupil, and so we can kind of see the pupil right there. Right? And the muscle of the iris contracts and relaxes to control the size of the pupil. Most people are familiar with the fact that the pupil, which is the dark at the center of your eye when you look at it, it can dilate and get bigger, or it can constrict and get narrower. And this regulates the amount of light entering the eye, which is part of the process of producing a good visual image and an accommodation in some instances. Right? So the three structures of the vascular tunic are the choroid, the ciliary body, and the iris. The internalmost structure of the eye, or the internalmost layer, is known as the neural tunic. And the neural tunic is made of a layer known as the retina. Here it's labeled the nervous tunic. Right? And it's kind of this buff color. You can see it here on the peel away layer. Right? If you look at it where it's cut in sagittal section on the image, it is this yellow layer. Right? And it stops right there. Right? It stops where the ciliary body begins. Right? So the retina is the layer that has the light receptors, right? The rods and the cones which detect light, and the sensory information collected by the rods and the cones are then transmitted by neurons that are within the retina to the eventually to the occipital lobe of the brain. And so covering the surface of the retina are not only sense receptors, but also the axons of the sensory neurons that make up the optic nerve. And so what you have at the back of the retina is you have a place where all of the axons that are carrying information about light all have to leave the eye, right? In order to carry this information to the brain, the neurons need to physically exit the eye. And that happens at a location right there known as the optic disc. The optic disc is simply a mass of axons exiting the eye to form the optic nerve. Because that particular location on the retina is entirely taken up by axons, there are no light receptors there, and it creates a blind spot. However, your brain kind of fills in this blind spot with the information it receives from the opposite eye. Let's go ahead and switch to another image here, and we will continue to talk a little bit more about the retina. So just to recap where we are, the retina is shown here in this yellow color, right there and right there. Okay, the optic nerve right there. Okay, and here's the optic disc, the location where the axons of the optic nerve exit the eye. There's another structure to discuss, though, and that is the fovea centralis. The retina is covered by rods and cones, which are the light receptors, but they're not uniformly distributed. There are certain areas in the eye or in the retina where there's a greater concentration of these light receptors. The fovea centralis is a little bit of a depression. You can see a little bit of a depression right there. Right? And that is the focal point for the light that enters the eye. As light enters the eye, it is focused onto the fovea. Right? And also the fovea has the densest concentration of photoreceptors. It's almost entirely cones, which are associated with color vision. And so when you look at an object in the world around you, and the object that you're looking at that is in sharp focus, the light that's bouncing off of that object is hitting the fovea centralis of your eye. Everything that is in your peripheral vision, that's off to the side of the specific object you're focusing on, is a little bit out of focus in your vision until you turn and focus on that. And so all of the light coming from the objects in your peripheral vision are hitting to either side of the fovea, and therefore the light is not quite as focused. The density of the light receptors is reduced, and therefore the objects in your peripheral vision are not in sharp focus until you redirect your eye so that the light from those objects are on your fovea. Now, surrounding the fovea, right, is an area called the macula lutea, which also contains a high concentration of photoreceptors. This is what begins to degrade in macular degeneration, causing or leading to progressive vision loss. Okay. If you were able to look into the eye to see the retina, like an ophthalmologist and an optometrist do when they're giving you an exam, you would see something that looks like this. We are actually looking into the retina, and it's kind of interesting. This is really the only place in the body where you can actually view blood vessels unobstructed by other structures. So you can see all these retinal blood vessels. Right? They are originating out of the optic disc, because not only is the optic disc where the neurons from the retina exit the eye, but it's also the place where veins and arteries enter the internal space of the eye to provide oxygen and nutrients and carry away wastes. Just lateral to the optic disc, you have the macula lutea. It's that dense circle. And at the center of it, you would have the fovea centralis. So this area right here, right, that is the part of your eye that produces the sharpest visual image. We're going to stop it there. On the next in the next installment, we'll walk through these structures on the models.